Life sentence inside ADX Florence, the world's most secure prison. This documentary examines life sentences inside ADX Florence, the United States' most restrictive federal prison. Drawing on publicly available court filings, federal sentencing records, inspector general reports, and investigative journalism, it explores how the prison operates, who is sent there, and what a life sentence means in near total isolation. The story focuses on verified facts, clearly marking disputed or unconfirmed claims. The quietest place in America. At the far edge of southern Colorado, where the land hardens into pale scrub and the mountains pull away from the horizon, there is a building that does not announce itself. No towering walls crowned with razor wire. No visible watchtowers silhouetted against the sky. Just concrete folded into the earth, angles designed to disappear. According to federal records, this is where the government sends men it believes cannot be safely held anywhere else. The prison is called ADX Florence. Officially, it is the United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility. In court filings, it is described with neutral language, the most restrictive conditions of confinement in the federal system. In news reports, it is often called something else entirely, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The first shock is not what happens here. It's what doesn't. There are no prison yards filled with shouting. No clanging doors echoing down cell blocks. According to Bureau of Prisons documentation, most prisoners at ADX Florence spend at least 22 hours a day alone in a single cell. Meals are passed through a slot. Movement is scheduled, silent, and controlled. Human contact is limited, measured, and logged. And for some men, this is not a temporary stop. This is the rest of their lives. According to sentencing records and Bureau of Prisons data, individuals sent to ADX Florence are often serving life sentences or decades-long federal terms. Many have been convicted of crimes that drew national attention: terrorism, organized crime leadership, serial killings, or violent acts committed inside other prisons. Others arrived here after being deemed unmanageable elsewhere, based on documented assaults or escape attempts. The prison opened in 1994, following a series of violent incidents in the federal system, including the murder of correctional officers. According to congressional testimony at the time, ADX Florence was designed to solve a single problem: what to do with inmates who could not be safely housed anywhere else. The solution was total control. Cells were built to be self-contained. A concrete bed. A steel desk. A sink with regulated water flow. A toilet with anti-flood mechanisms. Windows, if present at all, are narrow and positioned so that prisoners cannot see other cells, only sky. According to design documents cited in litigation, the goal was no human interaction unless authorized. Former officials have described the environment as one of sensory reduction. Light is constant but subdued. Sound is muted by design. Even footsteps are dampened by construction materials chosen to absorb noise. The building itself is a tool. For prisoners serving life sentences, this is not a phase. It is the end point. Court filings reveal that placement at ADX Florence is not decided by a judge at sentencing, but administratively by the Bureau of Prisons. Inmates can challenge their placement, but multiple federal courts have ruled that the conditions, while severe, do not in themselves violate the Constitution when justified by security concerns. That legal distinction matters, because it means that a person sentenced to life in federal court may not know, on the day they hear the words life imprisonment, that the location of that life will be one of near-permanent isolation. According to investigative reporting, prisoners at ADX Florence often arrive after years in other high-security facilities. They are transported under heavy guard, sometimes without knowing their destination. The journey ends at a facility deliberately located far from population centers, families, and media attention. Inside, orientation is brief. Prisoners are informed of the rules. Compliance is emphasized. According to Bureau of Prisons manuals, privileges, such as limited recreation time or access to educational materials, are earned gradually, through years of infraction-free behavior. For some inmates, especially those serving life sentences, progression through these step-down programs is slow or never completed. The psychological impact of such confinement has been the subject of lawsuits, academic studies, and United Nations criticism. In multiple cases, attorneys have argued that prolonged solitary confinement constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Federal courts have acknowledged the harshness of the conditions but have largely deferred to prison officials' security assessments. According to one federal judge, quoted in a published opinion, ADX Florence is designed to isolate, not to rehabilitate. That design is not accidental. It is funded, approved, and maintained by the federal government. Public budget documents show that ADX Florence costs significantly more per inmate than other federal prisons, due to staffing ratios, security technology, and infrastructure. Each cell is monitored. Each movement requires coordination. Silence, here, is expensive. Life sentences take on a different meaning in this environment. There are no cellmates. No communal meals. No casual conversations. Communication with the outside world is limited and monitored. According to Bureau of Prisons policy, phone calls are restricted, visits are rare, and physical contact is prohibited. For inmates whose families live thousands of miles away, contact can dwindle to letters, screened and delayed. Former prisoners, speaking to journalists after release or transfer, have described time at ADX Florence as disorienting. Days blur. Seasons are marked only by subtle changes in light through the narrow window. Some reported talking to themselves to preserve a sense of identity. These accounts are anecdotal but consistent across multiple independent interviews. Not everyone sent here remains forever. A small number of inmates are transferred out after demonstrating long-term compliance. But for those serving life sentences, especially those labeled as permanently dangerous, the expectation is different. This is where the sentence ends. The list of prisoners who have passed through ADX Florence includes names known worldwide, drawn from publicly reported cases, convicted terrorists, cartel leaders, domestic extremists. Each arrived with a narrative attached. Each encountered the same concrete cell. Yet the prison is not only about who is inside. It is about why it exists. According to federal testimony, ADX Florence represents the end of a spectrum. A place designed not for punishment alone, but for risk management. The question it raises is uncomfortable: what does justice look like when rehabilitation is no longer the goal? Life sentences in the United States already remove the possibility of release. At ADX Florence, they remove almost everything else. And still, the system insists this place is necessary. In official statements, the Bureau of Prisons emphasizes safety, of staff, of other inmates, of the public. ADX Florence, they argue, prevents violence by eliminating opportunity. No groups. No access. No chance. But critics argue that this level of control comes at a cost that is difficult to measure: the erosion of mental health, the disappearance of social connection, and the normalization of extreme isolation as a permanent condition. Those debates play out in courtrooms and academic journals. Inside the prison, they are irrelevant. What matters here is compliance. Silence. Time. For a man serving a life sentence, the math is simple. 22 hours a day, alone. Year after year. No countdown. No release date. No transfer guaranteed. Just concrete, routine, and the knowledge that this is where the federal system has decided the story ends. And this is only the beginning. Who gets sent here? The decision to send someone to ADX Florence is not made in a courtroom, and it is not announced at sentencing. According to Bureau of Prisons policy and federal court records, it happens later, quietly, inside an administrative process that few outside the system ever see. For inmates, the moment often comes without warning. Transfers to ADX Florence are initiated through internal reviews conducted by the Bureau of Prisons. These reviews assess what officials call institutional security risks. The language is broad by design. According to publicly available policy manuals and court filings, factors can include documented violence, escape attempts, leadership roles in criminal organizations, or behavior that prison officials believe poses a continuing threat. What matters is not only what someone did before incarceration, but what they are believed capable of doing next. In multiple federal lawsuits challenging placement at ADX Florence, prisoners have argued that they were sent there without adequate explanation or meaningful opportunity to contest the decision. Courts have acknowledged that due process protections are limited in this context. As long as prison officials follow internal procedures, judges have generally declined to intervene. That means ADX Florence is not reserved solely for those convicted of the most notorious crimes. While the prison has housed individuals convicted of terrorism, serial murder, and large-scale organized crime, it has also held inmates whose original offenses were different, but whose conduct inside prison led officials to classify them as uncontrollable. According to court filings, assaults on staff, attempts to organize other inmates, possession of contraband weapons, or repeated disciplinary violations can all contribute to a recommendation for transfer. Once approved, the move is swift. Inmates are transported under heavy restraint, often via a series of transfers designed to obscure the final destination. Former prisoners have told journalists that they did not know where they were going until they arrived. These accounts are consistent but anecdotal. The Bureau of Prisons does not publicly detail transport procedures. Arrival at ADX Florence marks a sharp break from the federal prison system most inmates know. Unlike other facilities, where population levels vary and movement is constant, ADX Florence operates on isolation as default. According to Bureau of Prisons descriptions submitted in court, inmates are initially placed in the most restrictive housing units, sometimes referred to as control units. Here, conditions are uniform. Cells measure approximately 7 by 12 feet. Doors are solid. Communication with neighboring cells is impossible by design. Recreation, when permitted, takes place alone in a concrete enclosure often described in media reports as a dog run, open to the sky but enclosed on all sides. Placement is reviewed periodically, but reviews do not guarantee change. According to Inspector General reports and court testimony, progression to less restrictive units requires years of infraction-free behavior. Even then, advancement can be denied if officials believe the inmate still poses a threat. For prisoners serving life sentences, the incentive structure is complicated. There is no parole. No release. Only the possibility of slightly less isolation. Who ends up here reflects how the federal system defines danger. Publicly documented cases show that ADX Florence has housed convicted international terrorists, including individuals sentenced in high-profile federal cases. It has also held leaders of domestic extremist groups, cartel figures extradited to the United States, and inmates convicted of killing correctional officers. But it has also held people whose names never appeared in headlines. In one federal case, cited in court opinions, an inmate convicted of armed robbery challenged his placement after years of disciplinary incidents in other prisons. According to the ruling, prison officials argued that his repeated assaults and refusal to comply with orders justified transfer to ADX Florence. The court agreed. This illustrates a central reality: ADX Florence is less about the crime of conviction than about perceived risk. That perception is shaped by internal intelligence, behavior reports, and assessments that are rarely made public. According to Bureau of Prisons declarations, officials rely on a combination of past conduct, affiliations, and institutional history. Critics argue that this system lacks transparency. Advocacy groups and human rights organizations have pointed out that inmates often cannot meaningfully challenge the evidence used against them, because much of it is classified as sensitive security information. Supporters counter that secrecy is essential. In sworn testimony, prison officials have stated that revealing detailed criteria could allow inmates to manipulate behavior or exploit vulnerabilities. ADX Florence, they argue, exists precisely because traditional controls failed. Once placed, inmates confront a reality that few had anticipated. Life sentences take on new dimensions here. In other prisons, even maximum security facilities, life-sentenced inmates may still interact with others, participate in programs, or hold limited jobs. At ADX Florence, those structures are largely absent. Mental health has been a recurring issue. According to court filings and investigative reporting, a significant number of inmates at ADX Florence have documented mental health diagnoses. Lawsuits have alleged that prolonged isolation exacerbates conditions such as depression, anxiety, and psychosis. In response, the Bureau of Prisons has stated that mental health services are available and that inmates with severe mental illness are not housed at ADX Florence. However, internal reports and litigation suggest that the definition of severe has been contested. In a landmark settlement referenced in public records, the Bureau of Prisons agreed to transfer some inmates with serious mental illness out of ADX Florence and modify certain practices. The prison remained open, and its core model unchanged. For those who remain, daily life is governed by routine. Lights on. Meals delivered. Counts conducted. Recreation scheduled. According to former inmates who later spoke to journalists, time becomes abstract. Without social markers, days and weeks lose distinction. Some described focusing on minor details, the sound of a food tray, the angle of sunlight, as a way to stay grounded. These accounts cannot be independently verified in every detail, but their consistency across multiple interviews has drawn attention from researchers and policymakers. The federal government maintains that ADX Florence is used sparingly. According to Bureau of Prisons statistics cited in news reports, the facility houses a small fraction of the federal inmate population. Its defenders argue that its existence allows the rest of the system to function safely. Yet for those sent there, the impact is total. Families often learn about the transfer after it happens. Because ADX Florence is located in a remote area, visits are difficult. According to visitation policies, physical contact is prohibited, and visits are tightly controlled. For international inmates, distance and diplomatic barriers can make visits nearly impossible. Letters become the primary connection. They are screened. Delayed. Sometimes redacted. According to Bureau of Prisons policy, correspondence is monitored for security reasons. Inmates have challenged these practices in court, with limited success. The result is a form of disappearance that is legal, regulated, and funded. Life sentences already remove someone from society. ADX Florence removes them from almost everything else. The question that lingers is whether this outcome is inevitable, or chosen. Federal officials argue that no one is sent here arbitrarily. Each placement, they say, reflects careful consideration of risk. Critics respond that when the consequences are this severe, the margin for error matters. Because at ADX Florence, there is no crowd to disappear into. No lower security unit to age out in. No release date to plan for. There is only the cell, the schedule, and the understanding that this is where the system sends people it has given up on managing any other way. And once inside, the focus shifts. Not on who you were. Not on what you did. But on whether you will ever leave. The cost of silence. By the time a person reaches the final stage of life at ADX Florence, the system has already made its most important decision. Not about guilt. Not about innocence. Those questions were answered long ago, in courtrooms and verdicts. The decision here is narrower, colder, and administrative. How much control is enough? ADX Florence does not exist in isolation from the rest of the federal system. It exists because of it. According to federal budget documents and Inspector General reports, the prison represents the extreme end of incarceration policy, a place where security overrides every other consideration, including cost. And the cost is substantial. Publicly available federal spending records show that housing an inmate at ADX Florence costs significantly more per year than at other high-security prisons. While exact figures vary by year and are not always broken out publicly, investigative reporting has consistently found that Supermax confinement requires higher staffing ratios, specialized training, advanced surveillance systems, and constant maintenance. Every cell is a controlled environment. Every door is automated. Every movement is logged. Silence, here, is not natural. It is engineered. Correctional officers assigned to ADX Florence undergo specialized training. According to Bureau of Prisons testimony, staffing levels are higher than at comparable facilities because even routine tasks, escorting an inmate to recreation, delivering medical care, responding to an alarm, require multiple officers and strict protocols. There are no shortcuts. Healthcare adds another layer of expense. Inmates serving life sentences inevitably age inside the system. According to federal court filings, the Bureau of Prisons is legally required to provide adequate medical care, regardless of security classification. At ADX Florence, this often means bringing medical staff to the inmate rather than transporting inmates to clinics. Every interaction is risk-assessed. Every procedure is planned. As prisoners age, chronic conditions become more common: hypertension, diabetes, mobility issues. Providing care under extreme security conditions drives costs higher. Transporting an inmate outside the facility requires coordination with federal marshals and local law enforcement. In many cases, care is provided on-site to avoid that risk. The longer someone stays, the more expensive they become. Life sentences turn ADX Florence into a long-term financial commitment. Unlike inmates with release dates, there is no end point where costs taper off. Decades pass. Infrastructure ages. Technology must be replaced. Staff rotate, but the prison remains. Critics argue that this model reflects a broader shift in American incarceration, from punishment toward permanent containment. In congressional hearings and policy papers, officials have described ADX Florence as a necessary safeguard. They argue that without it, the federal system would face unacceptable risks: assaults, escapes, organized violence inside prisons. Those arguments have carried weight in court. Judges reviewing challenges to ADX Florence have repeatedly deferred to prison administrators, citing national security and institutional safety. Even when acknowledging the severity of conditions, courts have ruled that the Constitution allows them if justified by legitimate penological interests. But the legal framework does not address the human experience inside the cell. Former inmates who later transferred out of ADX Florence have described the psychological toll of long-term isolation. According to interviews published by major news organizations, some reported memory problems, difficulty concentrating, and heightened anxiety long after leaving the facility. These accounts are subjective, but they align with academic research on prolonged solitary confinement. The federal government disputes that ADX Florence constitutes solitary confinement in the strictest sense, noting that inmates receive periodic reviews, access to mental health services, and limited recreation. Critics respond that when meaningful human contact is absent for years, terminology matters less than impact. What is not disputed is duration. For life-sentenced inmates, ADX Florence can mean decades in near-total isolation. According to publicly available sentencing data, some individuals have spent more than 20 years at the facility. Others have died there, their sentences ending not with release but with death in custody. Those deaths rarely make headlines. Families receive notifications. Paperwork is filed. The system moves on. From a financial perspective, ADX Florence represents an extreme allocation of public resources toward containment rather than rehabilitation. There are no vocational programs aimed at reintegration. No educational tracks designed for release. The stated purpose is control, not change. That distinction is crucial. In other parts of the federal system, even inmates serving life sentences may participate in programs, mentor others, or work institutional jobs. At ADX Florence, such opportunities are minimal or non-existent. According to Bureau of Prisons descriptions, the facility's mission is to house inmates who cannot function in any other environment. Once labeled as such, that designation is difficult to shed. Reviews occur, but progress is slow. Advancement through less restrictive units can take years. For some, it never happens. Critics argue that the criteria are opaque and that decisions often err on the side of caution. Caution, in this context, means isolation. There is also the question of precedent. ADX Florence has influenced prison design and policy worldwide. Other countries have studied its model. Some have adopted elements of extreme isolation for their own high-risk inmates. Human rights organizations have warned that this trend risks normalizing conditions that were once considered extraordinary. In the United States, the prison stands as both a warning and a benchmark. Supporters see it as proof that the system can control even the most dangerous individuals. Critics see it as evidence of a failure to imagine alternatives. Both sides agree on one thing: ADX Florence works as designed. There have been no successful escapes. Violence inside the facility is rare compared to other high-security prisons. From an operational standpoint, the model delivers control. But control has consequences. As inmates age, the question of end-of-life care becomes unavoidable. According to federal policy, inmates are entitled to compassionate release under certain circumstances, such as terminal illness. In practice, compassionate release is rarely granted, especially for inmates convicted of violent crimes. Court records show that some life-sentenced inmates at ADX Florence have petitioned for release based on age or health. Most petitions are denied. The original crime, judges often note, outweighs present condition. That means ADX Florence is not just a place of confinement. It is a place of death. Not in a dramatic sense. Quietly. Medically. Administratively. A man enters in his 30s or 40s. Decades pass. Staff change. Technology updates. The cell remains. When he dies, the system records the event and continues. From a budgetary perspective, this continuity is expensive but predictable. From a human perspective, it is absolute. ADX Florence embodies a particular philosophy of justice, that some individuals are beyond management, beyond rehabilitation, beyond reintegration. For them, the goal is not change, but containment until the sentence ends, or life does. That philosophy has broad implications. As policymakers debate prison reform, sentencing reform, and the future of incarceration, ADX Florence looms in the background as an endpoint. It represents what happens when risk is prioritized above all else. For the public, the prison remains distant and abstract. Few will ever see it. Fewer still will think about it beyond headlines. Yet it operates in the public's name, funded by public money, justified by public safety. It is the quietest place in America because it is meant to be. No protests outside the walls. No noise inside them. Just routine, repetition, and the steady passage of time. Life sentences, here, are stripped of metaphor. They mean exactly what they say. A life, contained. And when the door closes for the last time, there is no sound loud enough to mark it. Only silence.